is Raul Hernandez, and welcome to Raul's Wild Kingdom, coming to you live from my apartment. How about that, huh? Okay, first thing we're going to do today is...
We need government to take real action. It can't just be that our only approach to fighting the climate crisis is using free market solutions. That is not sufficient to meet the seriousness of what we're up against.
Where did you find this guy?
Me? I thought you hired him.
No, and there's so much evidence that when the cost of living is what workers are worried about, I understand that, I've lived that, I know what it's like to be worried about putting food on the table.
Okay, now I don't want to alarm anybody in this room, but it's just come to my attention that the person to your right is a liar.
Thank you, Jiggy. 8 to 14% isn't nothing in terms of reductions of emissions for consumer carbon pricing. What would you tell, or what would the party tell your grassroots, climate-conscious foundation that think that turning back on a consumer carbon pricing is a mistake, political theater, cynical even?
Well, I would just say that the major concern I have is that the policies that are working the best, we know very clearly industrial price on pollution and other regulations of that nature are working very well. Let's double down on what works for sure, because we know it works.
Boy, is he strict. Gotta get in there close and find out what's happening.
And I don't want a scenario where working people are put in that really uncomfortable and unfair position where they have to choose between their livelihood, like do I make my bills, do I put food on the table, or do I care about fighting the climate crisis? I don't want that to be the question in the minds of people. I want consensus and solidarity where we all get this is a fight that we need to win together. And so I don't want the burden to fall on working class people. And frankly, New Democrats, that's not something that sits well with us. We believe in making the big polluters pay and not having working people feel like they're the ones that are somehow having to shoulder this. And that's why we're laying out a path for a New Democrat vision for how we fight the climate crisis and make life affordable and create good jobs.
So that was a fucking lie.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is just not worth the cost, and now his carbon tax scheme is completely falling apart. First, his own budget watchdog proved conclusively that most Canadians are worse off even with the rebate. Then he was humiliated into granting a partial carve-out because his Liberal MPs were sick of the backlash they were getting from their voters. And now a majority of premiers are demanding an emergency carbon tax conference to put forward better ideas than his punishing tax. If he's so sure that his carbon tax is so good, then why doesn't he just sit down and listen to the Premier?
I'm old enough to remember when it was Justin Trudeau, the leader of the third party at the time, harshly criticizing then Prime Minister Stephen Harper for not meeting frequently enough with the premiers. It was a main line of attack during the 2015 campaign. Why is it any different now?
I don't think it's different, but I think this particular meeting that's being requested is being done completely for political purposes. I think that, you know, if the premiers were really serious about battling climate change and reducing greenhouse gases, they'd come forward with some suggestions. As of right now, there's been nothing put forward. And as we all know, the federal backstop program is in place because the provinces failed to put in programs on their own. So it was agreed upon to have these programs. It is shown to be not only the most efficient from an economic perspective, but also the most affordable when you include, of course, the Canada carbon rebates.
So everybody, every premier who is saying there has to be a more affordable, better way to still reach our targets is what, completely not basing any of that on fact, completely wrong? Because that includes one of your Liberal colleagues, Premier Andrew Furey.
Here's your badge. Badges? We don't need no stinking badges. Oh, no.
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change. Mr. Speaker, we could talk about vandals, but let us talk about climate vandals who are just on the other side of the House, Mr. Speaker. The member on the other side wants to know what the benefit of carbon pricing is. It's not difficult. All he has to do is look and speak to the member right behind him, who was part of the very first government in North America to price carbon, because it's the right thing to do, Mr. Speaker. It's the right thing to do for the economy. It's the right thing to do in fighting climate change. It's the right thing to do for Canadians.
Your Majesty, you look like the piss boy. God, you're right. I do look like the piss boy.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr.
Mr. Speaker, Scott Moe said he sat down and pored over the data and could not possibly find a more effective way to combat GHG emissions than this government's policy on pricing pollution. You know, right now, today in this House, we are discussing untold employment and economic opportunity for Canadians, including the people of Regina Capel. If he won't stand up for the workers at Regina Capel, we will, Mr. Speaker.
Ah, the count of money. Don't correct me. What is it?
Of course, Your Majesty.
I've come on the most urgent of business. It is said that the people are revolting. You said it. They stink on ice.
There's nothing more affordable. If we just
Well, that's on the industrial side. To be fair, he's talking about an industrial carbon price, not a consumer one.
But it's all one program. You can't separate the two because the industrial price is linked into the price on pollution, to the consumer price. And I think that you can't really take these apart because it works as a whole. And all of our estimates are based on both parts of that program.
Well, that's not entirely true, because when you look at the Canadian Climate Institute, just to follow up on that, Ms. Taylor-Roy, which recently did an outside analysis, 30% of the reductions were attributed to the industrial side, while only 8 to 9% were attributed to the consumer side. So they were able to break it apart to base their analysis. Why can't you just remove the consumer side and either strengthen the industrial side or do something else?
Because the industrial side is based off the price of pollution that is put on the consumer side.
Let's bring in your colleague, Mr. Scherer, because I think what Ms. Taylor-Roy is alluding to is the fact that your party actually hasn't unequivocally said or denounced or said you'd remove the industrial side of the carbon tax. You focus solely on the consumer side. So will you?
Well, if I could just address a few of the pieces of misinformation that we just heard from my Liberal colleague. You absolutely can separate them. The only reason why they're linked is because that's how the government linked the program. She talked about me already having, the Prime Minister has already met with the premiers. That was in 2016. None of the premiers who were at that meeting in 2016 hold office today. And, by the way, the program that they were briefed about from Justin Trudeau back in 2016 had a cap on the price on the carbon tax that he's since blown through. He's on his way to quadrupling the carbon tax. We know his approach. But
respectfully.
The point is, if the name of the game, if the goal is to reduce global emissions, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions worldwide, then Canada absolutely should be exporting more of what will help do that. And we have a government here who says there's no business case for LNG, while other countries are filling the market while they're raising the cost on Canadian consumers. And tax is not an environment plan. We have to stop talking about it as if it is. The last time Justin Trudeau hiked the tax on carbon, Canada dropped 4 spots in the Climate Change Performance Index. So it is not working. It's a tax plan, not an environment.
Okay, we'll get into...
It's good to be the king.
Took place yesterday in the House of Commons. Would the NDP support the Conservatives' call for this meeting? And you did. And you also went on to say that the carbon tax, the consumer side of the carbon tax policy, is not the be-all, end-all. 2 weeks ago when I was asking you for your party's position, you were not clear. Can you be clear? Are you rejecting the consumer side of the carbon tax?